Morning. Dr. R. Michael Fisher this morning. Wanted to do a talk on fearology and the notion of what a fearologist is. Not my first time I've talked about this topic. There are other videos on my YouTube channel you can check out on fearology, sort of part of becoming a fearologist, but I haven't really ever done a video getting deeply into becoming a fearologist, what that might mean. So just about coming into the year 2024 and the turn of this, the next year. Good chance I thought, well, why don't you promote becoming a fearologist to young people out there listening? You could be 10 years old, you could be 20, you could be 30, and for older people and others as well. But particularly, I just want to promote becoming a fearologist in the world today and the contribution that you can make to the world to make the world a better place in easy, simple terms. But basically, to be able to analyze the world critically, reflectively, substantively, scientifically, and artistically and creatively to come up with a new theory, perhaps a new set of sub theories about what fear is, how fear is located, how it works in the world, and its complexities in the making of a world and in the destruction and unmaking of a world. Little intro there, a little bit complex. Let me get down to some real basics. Is the study of fear and its relationship to life is the basic definition for fearology. Now, I've given that. A few other people have indicated um, they are involved in fearology and or fearologists. You can find them on the internet sometimes, but not in academia per se. You will not find the word fearology, I think, hardly ever in the real scholarly so-called world of the higher learning and higher education. That's not important to me so much. Yes, I'd like it to be there, and I'd like fearologists to take degrees and get all the education they need to come and be, great fearologists in the world. But really, this idea of the study of fear is something that you can participate in. I can participate in because we choose to. It would be no different than if somebody wanted to study the stars, the universe, and they want to take up becoming involved in astronomy. Or someone might say, well, I want to become an astrologer, astrology, and so on. There are so many ologies, biology, psychology, sociology. You know the shtick. There's many ologies which are just forms of study. So I thought fearology, fear was so important, so fundamentally a networking of connectivity fear. And I'm leaving that definition of fear kind of wide open right now. You might notice that. So that I see and imagine and have a good sense of argument I could make that fear is fundamental to everything. It's something as fundamental as gravitational forces are, or other energy, forces in physics, etc. That this fear has not been understood well. We need a new discipline to study it that is both at the same time a discipline and a transdiscipline. It goes beyond any discipline in how to know. It goes beyond any one methodology or set of questions of how and what kind of questions we should ask about fear and the world, reality, life, the cosmos, evolution, history. Fear is involved in all. That is kind of assumption I make. Now that's me. Your approach to fearology may take some other assumptions. It may relate to some of what I'm saying. Yes, I've been on to this for 35 years, studying fear as a notion or beginning of an idea that there ought to be a fearology study on the planet, and it ought to be available for everybody to study. That knowledge ought to be cohesive, coalesced, and be legitimate and criticized and improved, just like any knowledge. So I'm talking about knowledge and intelligence, and intelligence that's going to be needed to solve the worst problems on this planet and the cascading crises that we now face. So now you get a sense of where I'm talking. So to promote a fearologist, if you are interested in studying fear And obviously, more and more people are certainly telling me, and you'll read more about it. And I'm sure you're, even if you're listening at all to the world, people are highly anxious, fearful, terrified. And then it gets recorded in other symptoms. People are very lonely. They're searching for belonging. They're searching for XYZ, community, etc. But they're also searching for purpose and meaning in a world that seems pretty despairing in terms of how long the future actually is going to be sustainable to life. And that means for young people, this is a very high stakes issue. Is there a future for me? How do I come to live every day with a sense of purpose, excitement? When I wake up in the morning, I know what I'm here for. I'm suggesting Fearology is one way to find that purpose and meaning, and a potentially very successful career. And you're going to have to define success for you. Everybody is. But success also means to have influence and impact. So that's what my journey has been about. And in 35 years since late 1989, I dove into the study of fear, and I said, I think there's something here that has not really been fully pulled out. So then I go about my work, right? A fearologist then has to go study fear. So that's what you would do. You right now, if you says, well, I'm kind of curious on being a fearologist. I'm going, go, great, great. And you can be an amateur fearologist, right? I am in a way as well. I don't get paid to be a fearologist. I'm not in a academic position where they pay me and say, "Whoa, you're in the fearology department," or "We're going to put the fearologist in the psychology department, and then you'll become, a part of the faculty studying your specialty, which is fear." Oh, I would love that. Uh, Tried it, doesn't work. Not so far. It's not happening in those institutions and or even private research institutions that have lots of funding, like a national health science, department of the government. They ought to be, allowing and promoting fearology and the bringing in fearologists to consult to and to do research and to educate and bring people up to speed, as I call it, to the 21st century and the demands of what fear has been producing in its forms of major excesses and toxicity forms. And so fear obviously can be, something really useful. As I say, I think it is embedded in everything and helps everything flow and move and evolve and develop. And fear also can become toxic. So it's kind of like carbon dioxide, right? In the new environmental eco movement, we realized global warming and the greenhouse effect of gases like carbon dioxide, which is the major one. When we breathe out carbon dioxide, it's a healthy, natural chemical. It's in the environment. It always has been for a long time, historically, millions of years, no doubt, on the planet. But when you concentrate it and you overuse carbon dioxide resources that are, locked in carbon, like plant fossils, and that you burn them as oil, for example, you're going to produce excess carbon that the atmosphere, ecological systems are not preparatory to enough a degree to be able to handle that concentration of carbon dioxide. That it then changes the composition of the air above us. That affects the sunlight coming through, and all of a sudden we're global warming like crazy, and it could kill a lot of life in a fairly short time. We're trying to figure out how to reduce that, right, and get it down to carbon capture limits and a recycling of that carbon in the atmosphere to a more healthy system for a lot of life and all of life, and of course humans included. May or may not happen, as we know. That's difficult. But what I'm saying is that fear is a very similar, analogous concept. I believe it's as universal and intercombined, combined with life as carbon is at the center. It's like a focal, you know, um, component of organization of life. Fear, equally so, and fear, arguably equally so, even in non-living creatures, so-called, in humans and greater than humans. Very complex, more discussion. I'm not here to try and tweeze out and theorize about all of those reasons, I would say fear is that ubiquitous, because you get to a point where you say, well, you, Fisher, you're just putting fear in such a broad way, and putting it everywhere in a sense, saying it's everywhere. But doesn't that just, undermine the very definition of fear itself? And so it becomes all meaning. And I said, well, you could say that about carbon. Carbon has a definition, but I'm also saying it's ubiquitous and it's everywhere. Now, the difference is, and that doesn't mean carbon isn't legitimate. So it's like I'm basically saying, yeah, well, carbon is a thing in a materialist sense. I'm saying fear is a thing in not just a materialist sense. So now we're talking about knowledge, aren't we? We're talking about knowledge, whether it's materialist worldview of what knowledge is and what things are and the real and the true. And we're talking also about things that are more invisible. Where is it located? How do you see it? Carbon atom you can see put under, particular kind of technological device to actually see its molecules and so on. Whereas when you're working with fear, you're going, well, how can I put that under a microscope? I can't see it, grab it in the same way. And yet, every one of us would say, yeah, but it's still there. Uh, you know, and again, the definition of fear as a fearologist, that's one of the first things you'll learn is if you go into becoming an amateur fearologist, or and then eventually maybe a totally professional specialist virologist. You're always going to be playing, I can guarantee you. I mean, I could be wrong, but everything I've learned in 35 years is you're going to always be playing with the problem with the definition of fear itself, the problem with the epistemology, which means the study of how we know what fear is. So the epistemology of fear, the ontology of fear, which is the nature of being itself, comes up, which is the nature of reality, the nature of truth. So there's the philosophical aspect, and there's even a spiritual metaphysical aspect. What's the difference between love and fear when we see it written in the Bible as, when we basically, God is love and that which is not love is fear. These kinds of theological notions, even. So the beautiful, fun thing I find about fearology is I can explore and go into all those disciplinary areas. It doesn't matter what, from the material world to the spiritual world, of investigations and inquiry. So that's what fearology is about. It's inquiring into the nature and role of fear. And, this very idea of the nature of life, non-life even, but just the simple purpose is more easier to grasp is the role, the nature of this relationship and the role of fear with life. Fearology. The fearologist studies that. That is their specialty. But you can see at moments of specialty, it also has this incredible broad generalizability and connection to all other things, because one of the arguments is that fear is in everything in that sense. And again, I'm not talking about a material, but something that's right now to us immaterial. We cannot pin it down. But again, if I said, well, what is life? You'd say, well, pin it down. And you can't get life itself and pin it down. It's like not a material. Life is life. And then there are certain materials that you could say, well, when you put that material together with that, it forms life. And I'm saying, well, I think there are things that you could put together, and all of a sudden you're going to see and really get to know how important fear is in that building of a compound of connections and relations that influence and help shape everything. Okay. What's interesting in my invite this morning is to bring creativity to the field of fearology. So I went and studied, as much as I could about the literature of what people have already studied, what they've thought about fear, and you start collecting that. So that's what a fearologist is. You start building a huge library for yourself, that knowledge, as much as you want, as little as you want, but you're going to have to build some kind of knowledge about what's already out there. What are people already saying about fear? And so then you start analyzing, okay, so what are the things they're saying the same, these people who write about, think about, teach about fear? And then you look about, well, what is it where they disagree? And that seems contradictory. Someone's saying that's how you manage fear, that's how you manage fear. This is what fear is. No, this is what fear is. Or people like the fearologists say, well, I think all of you are a little off. I think all of you are overly fixed on thinking you already know what fear is and or isn't. And you start going into your little silos of protection of those particular definitions of fear. And psychology is right now dominating the whole field of fear. Historians are starting to come up and say, well, we want to do the history of fear. But then you see the historians of fear, they rely on the psychology of fear for their fundamental definitions. And I find that just starts to, again, reduce down in one discipline instead of a whole trans disciplines, many disciplines, multiple disciplines, layered disciplines. You get one starts to control the definition of a fear again, which is a feeling and emotion. You can look it up in the dictionary. That's what you get, right? So we're already so biasing our knowledge about fear. And so fearologist troubles that. We worry that whole problem of this reductionism, which is called. And that's a scientific approach to knowledge, is to critique when reductionism happens to how we take reality and try and reduce it down to simple formulas or mathematical equations. And we're not saying that's wrong or bad. We're just saying you can bet on it, it's incomplete and it's not satisfactory full knowledge or rich enough knowledge for what humans need to take and understand, let's in this example, the concept of fear and how it's related to our world and all our world problems, more or less in some way. Yeah, pretty exciting. So creativity is important and this challenging of the already known. So how you do that is your fearological work. That's up to you. There's myself and maybe a few others that you can find. Not a lot of fearologists on the planet, I can tell you that. Hardly any. And the ones that I have seen trying to promote fearology a little bit on their own, a few, they just want to look at the science. They actually define fearology as the science of fear. And that's basically the neurology, the biology, the materiality of how you measure fear in nervous systems, right? Brain scanning, autonomic response systems, fear, flight response, freeze, and so on. Very scientific and yes, very simplified and very biological, not bad. Again, the fearologist says very incomplete, very narrow, very reductionistic. Because if I go to a novel and listen to an artist, a great novelist, writer, thinker, imaginer, the highest caliber and well educated, well disciplined, but also very artistic and creative writing a novel. And in that novel, they're talking about fear a lot. In fact, fear is driving a lot of the emotions of the novel. It's actually driving. If it weren't for fear, that novel couldn't even hardly be written. Yeah, okay, so now I'm going, well, what is that fear? Like, are they just talking about some simple fear? I'm going, whoa, 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 wait, because if the actual text, what we're reading as humans, we're getting knowledge and intelligence from it. Yeah, we are. From any human being that's producing a product, from an organism that's learned to live its life and survive, they're giving us information about how to be with fear. And that's an intelligence that we can put all of those intelligence, the novelist, the biologist, the brain scanning knowledge on the neurology of fear, biology of fear, with sociology of fear, the politics of fear, the aesthetics and the architecture of fear, the geography of fear. Those are real categories, folks. But still, the definition of fear through even all of those that I just mentioned still tends to circulate around this narrow, but not always. There's a few people who really break open the imaginary, as I call it, about the nature of fear. And we start to imagine fear in ways we weren't taught to, we aren't reading about, we aren't thinking about, others aren't thinking about, and there's no big discussions about it in the universities or even in the public. Oh, is fear something maybe that we don't fully understand? So fearologist starts with that fear is probably something we don't already know everything about. So start with the certain humility of a good scientist, of a good artist, of a good inquirer. That's the important thing. And that can be from the material aspects, from the spiritual aspects, and all in between approaches to understanding reality and truth about fear and its nature and role in real fear problems. So I talk about as a fearologist, there is a fear problem on the planet and has been in the evolution of the Earth cosmos system. A fear problem that's a capital F, capital P. And it has gotten further ahead from a human point of view. It's got further ahead of us as a species than we're capable of solving that fear problem. Okay, so I won't go into detail on that because I don't want to make this video really long, but I've just completed a book. It's called The Fear Problematique, a little quick. You can check that out for a lot of my thinking about the fear problem. But I have many other publications online that don't cost anything. They're free, download PDFs, etc. The fear problem. So a fearologist tends to magnify and intensify the fear problem way beyond anybody else studying who is not a fearologist. Okay, get it? Yeah. So that's another aspect of what makes a fearologist interesting, I think, and a contributor to a really important part of all of us getting more and more together from all our knowledge bases, our intelligences, putting that together. But you have to have a fearologist at the base. That's my. They've got to be there in the conversation at the table, and currently they are not. That's my experience in 35 years. I've tried to get on the table talking in discussions with educators at schools, with concerned about school violence, in healthcare systems where we're concerned about mental health problems and the ecological problems. And they're not inviting us. They're not inviting me, and they're not reading our work for the most part. So, some people also write and think about fear in very creative ways, and they are called fearist philosophers, or the philosophy of fearism is their specialty. And I also interact with those folks, and you can check that out on the internet, fearism. More and more on that. Just check Google Scholar and look up fearism. I also came up with that term early in the 90s, and Desh Subha came up with it in 1999 out of Nepal, and we didn't know each other's work, but now we've went, wow, okay, we're interested in some similar things. So let me get down to the last two things in terms of this creativity. I've found there's more to how to make fearology really creative and interesting and capable of analyzing, solving really difficult problems. I can't prove that that works yet. I can't prove it's going to be helpful, but I just intuitively know, and from all my study and just knowing itself, we're awaiting some real breakthroughs in understanding fear and applying it right to real problems. But we also have to have theoretical development and growth on the nature and role of fear, as well as philosophical, as well as the practical. So it's not either or theory or applied only. You may be attracted more to theory, more attracted to the applied, or a combination of both, and you feel comfortable, spending your time in your life, in your career on those two. But let's get to the two creative bits that I think are an example for you to when you think about, okay, I don't want to just get stuck on studying fear and it might get boring after a while. And here's why it doesn't get boring is good creativity in anything, not just the study of fear. Good creativity, as I've understood it and studied a lot of the literature on creativity, what makes things creative, creative intelligence, things like this, is that basically you're able to take something that is familiar and juxtapose it with something unfamiliar. So you put it in a different condition or background. Artists do this. They might take the apple and then put it in an environment with a volcano and stick the apple on top of, or beside the volcano, or a nude woman or whatever. And all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of new things that start to make meaning or possible meaning imaginatively about the nature and role of an apple and volcano in that case, or whatever, or the woman's body. And so just by putting it in a different environment, different situation, or you create it so that it's animated and it starts talking, and it can be a teacher, and an apple can teach to a child in a way that a human couldn't. Oh, okay. Well, an apple's not just an apple. You see what I'm saying? Well, same with the fear. Fear can be put in different analogies in different contexts to try to bring out more interest in what fear is capable of as a teacher as a possible understanding of its pathologies and its offerings in a good way. So two things that I found really creative. One first one was that happened more or less by accident. And I was in a bookstore in a university library, and I saw this huge textbook. In sections, I like to walk through all the different categories and disciplines, courses, and look at their texts. This was in about 1998 or maybe 99 or 2000, somewhere in there. And I was doing a PhD at the University of British Columbia, and I saw this textbook, and I guess it was called Introduction to Sexuality. And obviously, for like a 200 level course, a general course that many students could take, and it's an option course, no doubt, because there was not a department of sexology in that university. I can guarantee that. Now, some places there actually might be. Sexology actually is a discipline, subdiscipline, and has its own, study and its own certification process. Not common, but it is actually out there. So that caught me, and I said, "Oh, fearology, sexology, they're similar. Interesting." Looked at that textbook, just open, flip through it. Huge thing, $200 textbook kind of thing, full of color pictures, all these diagrams, all this research summarized, and all these materials, starting from the basics of sex to what is sexual development and sexuality and so on. And I'm going, why isn't there a textbook for fear like that? Equivalent to what sex is in the nature of life and the role, right? Sex, sexuality. And I bought the text and I started going through it and reading it. And then I started crossing out the word sex and putting in fear. And I just did this like as a discipline. I constantly did that as I read this. I didn't read the whole book, but as I'm going through how you build a course, a body of knowledge and intelligence on sex, sexuality, sexual development, sexuality. And I went, we should have fearology, fearologist. We should have all the same knowledge and intelligence put together in a textbook like that. And I think it would even be more interesting for fear than it is for sex. I'll leave that up to you in your imagination to think about why I think that. So that was one. And so that opened up, in other words, by juxtaposing the world of sexual research and knowledge and education with fear, I began to expand and think about fear new vocabulary were coming out, and just a really rich possibility that hasn't even begun to be ferreted out in all its possibilities, that juxtaposition. The next juxtaposition has come through my study and interested in intelligence in nature, for example. So this is greater than humans, non-humans, intelligence systems in plants, for example. How are plants intelligent? How are fungi intelligent? So that led to looking at a next book that we're reading with my partner right now, Merlin Sheldrake. And I really encourage you to listen to Merlin Sheldrake. He's got some interesting ways that he talks about fungi. So this is what this book is about. As you can see, all the diagram of the different kind of mushrooms. But mushrooms are only the surface. They're like the apple, and underneath and behind all these outer forms are the mycelial threads, these tiny microscopic threads, some of them not so microscopic when they're in bundles, of cells of fungi that grow. And these are not plants or animals. Fungi are in their own kingdom of organisms in classification systems, just like bacteria are, so on. That's part of the real physical part, right, to the fungi. And you go, and they're everywhere. As you listen to Sheldrake talk or other mycologists, that's the study of nature and role of fungi. Mycology it's a real growing in the last 10 years, especially a field, and it's finding its own place even in the academy and some research journals. People are taking it more seriously. More young people are getting into studying fungi. And I'm basically saying, yeah, and he argues they are the basis of all life. They connect and work the network, the whole ecological network of all life. I'm saying the same about fear, and fearology ought to be the study of that connection of fear to all life and non-life interactions. And so the fungi, without going into all the detail, listen to Sheldrake is what I'm suggesting, Merlin. Have a look at that, read that book or articles on mycology and its importance. These mycelial networks of communication systems. I again am making the analogy. Everything he was kind of talking about mycology, I says, is very similar to virology. Mycology wasn't accepted when people started trying to name it, coin it. Fearology, as I'm coining, is not being accepted yet, yeah, in certain places, right? And so he then says most of the really good research and really interesting inquiries and experiments were done by amateurs, amateur mycologists, not people with professional PhD degrees at top universities or anything like that. And he says they're still doing it. And the reason he says they're so important, and I'm saying it's really important to be an amateur philologist as well as you could be a scholarly academic philologist, is that you and these mycologists were not controlled by the university structures and the funding structures for research. They're not controlled by what you should do, and you can't do that here. Nobody will believe you. And these guys, folks, not just guys, people, um, the amateur mycologists just went and did their own thing. They were naturalist observers, and that's to be a philologist, you have to be a great observer. And that's your naturalist part of you, that you can be and really fine tune your naturalist observer. And that's scientifically and artistically. And being a naturalist is not just about science only. Yes, it includes the scientific ways of seeing and thinking. But science is also expanding greatly. In mycology, when the study of these threads that communicate almost like a giant nervous system. Now there's a whole science called network science, and they're studying mycelium and seeing how they're similar to computer network systems of communication, and there's design properties and forms. But the whole idea of what happened to what is a fungi, as Sheldrake talks about, you can't put the fungi in any simple category. Um, okay, you can say, yes, it is fungi, it has a mushroom. Yes, they do. But its actual operation, just like sex, is not the same as sexuality and sexual development. It's like they're related, but sex itself, coitus, is not all of what sexuality is. Sexuality is so huge. Fearology, same. It's not just about fears. Same with mushroom. That this fungi network, and I'm saying there's a fear network, there's a sexual network, there's a spiritual network of different connections and communication systems going on in very complicated ways that we mostly do not understand, especially when they're mostly invisible and below the ground. And up till now, we haven't had good technology, as Sheldrake says, to study fungal nets, these mycorrhizae that connect and really are the living functional system that helps everything grow and decompose. So I'm putting to that now together and thinking, how have fearology and mycology juxtaposed, just like fearology and sexology? Okay, so those are a few creative ideas. That's pretty where I'll end the video. So you can throw any questions to me about this idea of fearology and fearologists for the future. I encourage you to say, yeah, I think I'm going to do this serious career and or amateur for a while, see how it goes. The most important thing is that the fearologists start to talk to each other and start to write together and start to critique each other. So on that note, I did start in 2018 a journal, International Journal of Fear Studies. And that was for a really broad understanding of fear. Fear studies, very broad, very transdisciplinary, very deep, very, scientific to very mystical. I'm interested in that journal conveying and bringing together researchers on fear. And obviously, being a fearologist is not everybody's thing, but if it is, you can publish in that journal. And we will certainly look at your work and we'll send it out for peer review, just like we do all the other articles. Right now, that journal is non-housed. We're trying to find it. We had a university housing that archive for a while, and now we're still in the process of getting one. But hopefully, in the next year or two, we'll have one. But that doesn't mean you can't be writing your good articles now, or even talking with me, or sending me your writing. I'm always really interested in what are the you know newest and best thinkers. Yeah, I want the newest and the very best thinkers on fear gathered and that knowledge collected, and we can solve some of the problems going on this planet. I'm pretty convinced. Okay, on that happy note, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.